Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to start with, and I'm Commissioner Alan Mayo. I'm chairman of the Sarasota Manatee MPO, and welcome to the Southwest Florida TransForum. Before we get started, because the list is very, very long, and I'm sure I'm going to omit someone, because you all are from all over the southwest of Florida. Will all the elected officials that are here please stand? That'll make it easier. I won't insult anybody. Great. We have about 15 to 20 elected officials, so thank you. Well, as we all begin our 2045 long-range transportation plans, we have a lot to think about and a lot to learn. As always, we will be planning for growth and the traffic that comes with it. We will continue to address the safety of walkers, cyclists, and motorists, and we will also tackle some new mandates. Infrastructure resiliency from seas and storms, freight economic development, tourism are all priorities, and of course, preparation for autonomous vehicles, which frankly frightened me to death, but I may just be a victim of wanting to drive my own car. These new challenges are what we are here to learn about today. We have 5 terrific presenters, and their bios are on the placemats in front of you. Let's get started, and I'm going to turn the podium over to Lee Holt, who will share today's agenda. Lee?
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. You have in front of you a placemat, and like the commissioner said, the bios of our speakers are on one side, but if you turn it over, you will see the agenda for this afternoon's program on the other side. We are mandated by law to do 2045 master plans for transportation. We do this planning every 5 years. We have about 18 months to complete this 5-year cycle. If you look at the very bottom, you can see each of the MPOs in the District 1 FDOT, Florida Department of Transportation region, and when their adoption dates are. So you can contact the MPO where you live, or the TPO, Transportation Planning Organization, to get involved in that 18-month process. One of the most important aspects of that planning process is community involvement, and there are opportunities throughout the process for the community to weigh in and to discuss with your neighbors what is important to you and what you think we should be spending your transportation dollars on in the future. So today we're going to discuss some of the new things that are mandated to be included in that plan. We all know about horizontal traffic, but we are going to talk about vertical traffic. What do we do with our airspace? We are responsible for including economic development. We are to address tourism. We are responsible for all modes of transportation. That includes walking, biking, automobiles, transit, ports, airports, and space. And of course, what's on everybody's minds is autonomous vehicles. They're here, they're ready. The cars are ready to go, but our policy and our infrastructure is not, and we have to plan for that future as well. So we have fabulous presentations. I've had an opportunity to see all of them, and I am really excited for you to see them as well. We do want to have some audience participation. So we're going to try this, and if it doesn't work, we're going to abandon it and skip over these slides when the opportunity happens. But you have 3 ways to provide feedback, and usually we say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, please turn off your devices. But we're going to say, get your phone out. You can install this app for free, Poll Everywhere, Or you can go to the internet and log in with TransForum 146, because that's how many people were registered, but I'm pretty sure we went over that. Or you can text your answers to TransForum 146 to 22333. If you want to text, you can do that right now. Just TransForum 146 to that text number, and it will connect you to the system. So you have 3 ways to participate in the polling. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. This is also on the bottom of your agenda, so that if you need to go back to it, it's right on the blue line on the bottom, because we will be asking questions throughout the program. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. I'm going to have you look at your program, look at the bottom so you can see that, and I'm going to go to our first question, which is just a test question. What city did you come from today? We got too many people.
We have too many people.
Does internet stop working?
That's okay. That's the Internet Explorer.
We may be overloading their Wi-Fi, which was our concern.
It's thinking. Oh, it's working.
There you go. People are coming in. All right, one worked. Let's try another one. Oh, it's still changing. All right. Please rank the following economies from largest to smallest. So this is. That's okay. We're gonna go to the slides. Corinne, do I have to do something up here? Oh.
It's just, I think I put it out.
Oh, we're answering how did you get here? Thank goodness somebody carpooled. As we saw in an earlier meeting today, about 95% of our population travels alone in a car most of the time. So this is actually not too bad. All right, now we'll do this one. Please rank the following economies from largest to smallest. Canada, Florida, Italy, Netherlands, Turkey. Which one is the largest economy down to the smallest? All right, we'll see how it goes, but we're going to be asking you some more important questions as we go through the program. So let's answer this one. We'll stop with Florida being first. I'm really pleased that we have with us today the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Alice is going to answer this and many other questions. I think it's very exciting to see a presentation from the private sector at a transportation forum, because the synergy, especially when you see her presentation, it's pretty amazing how dependent our economy and the success of the private sector is going to be on infrastructure needs. So, Alice?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allyson Kona. I work at the Florida Chamber of Commerce. The headquarters for the Florida Chamber is in Tallahassee, but the international office, which is the office that I run, is based in Miami. So there's two of us that run the international office for the Florida Chamber. We're co-located with Enterprise Florida's international office, so we do coordinate with the state on a lot of activities. The governor's South Florida office is also located with us, as well as the lieutenant governor. So we do get a lot of visibility as to what's happening around the state, particularly on international trade. So today I am going to be focusing on the roadmap for the future. Some of you may have seen a rollout of our Florida 2030 project. Looks like this. And there's a web page to download it, so we can share that with you. But it is part of our continuous effort that comes out of our foundation. The Florida Chamber Foundation has been around for about 50 years. The Chamber itself has been around for 100 years. And the 2030 project is something that's built on other research projects that we've done over the past several decades. More or less every 10 years, we come out in the field with a large research planning project that's more of a visioning for the state, a strategic roadmap, which has a lot of input and engagement from the private sector as well as the public sector and partners from around the state. So this process was no different. In the past, they've been known as the cornerstone projects, but we've now moved to Florida 2030 as we're planning for 2030. We'll begin. These are some of our stakeholders. We've reached out significantly into the private sector to have a lot of feedback from what they were seeing. It wasn't just public sector initiatives that we felt were important, looking at what the infrastructure needs are, what planning organizations are looking at, what they're considering, but it's also at the speed and change of the private sector. So their input, their support, and part of this was fairly significant. We had a lot of not-for-profits that were part of the process as well. So we based our plan on the 6 pillars. Some of you may be familiar with this. FDOT uses this planning process, so does Department of Economic Opportunity, and several other state and agencies, as well as counties, economic developers, planners, et cetera. So this is kind of the roadmap, the template for what we do in terms of planning. And included in that is infrastructure, talent, what we look at, civic and governance systems, a variety of factors that are important to how we plan our state and how we prepare going forward. And the recommendations on the plan are based on the 6 pillars, so they're outlined accordingly in that. The plan we looked at over 3 years of research, not just from our development teams, but we visited all 67 counties. We took feedback from over 10,000 people in all these regional input and collaborative sessions. Public sector individuals, so we had elected officials provide us feedback on what they were seeing in terms of changes in their community, what the challenges were, what the risks were, but we also engaged civic leaders as well as private sector within each region. And we came up with what we call an engine for change. So these are the 6 factors that are involved in the engine for change, looking at how we are competing globally. So Lee mentioned a little bit, and you saw the query on where we are in international, and I'll talk a little bit more about international later, as that really is what I focus on a day-to-day basis. But we are a global hub for trade. A lot of what comes in and out of this state, 15 seaports, deep water seaports, 20 commercial airports, 2 spaceports, are all interrelated with trade. There's a significant amount of logistics and distribution activity that happens in the state that contributes to jobs that's related to international trade. So that's a significant portion of what we do. But we look at how we can build the workforce pipeline. How do we ensure that we're creating the right platform for students to grow and learn and collaborate and become part of an innovation economy. As the state has transformed, and we've changed a lot over the past 10 years in particular, the type of workforce that employers are going to need has changed as well, and it continues to change. If we think about, 2030 is 11 years from now. First graders will be in their senior year in 11 years. They'll be entering the workforce. And that was a big part of what we looked at when we considered the plan, is we're preparing a plan for our seniors. What kind of world are they going to come into? What kind of skill sets do they need? What is the private sector doing? How do we ensure that not only do we retain the talent that we are growing here, but we continue to attract? I mean, our unemployment rate is it's about 3.3%. So we're practically at full employment. We know that employers today are struggling with talent. Attracting talent, growing talent, retaining talent, that'll continue to be a challenge for us going forward. How do we be a state that we continue to have these dynamic factors that are part of what we do on a daily basis? So we looked at the drivers for change, and there were 8 areas that we considered. Some of them are based on how we work, and others are how we live, because it's not just about workforce, the private sector, but it's also quality of life. Do people want to live here? We look at factors such as resiliency, as well as resources, both financial, public, as well as what exists within our environment. How do we ensure that we have the right resources, that we are building the resilient infrastructure that we need to support everything that's happening, both from a workforce perspective, but also from a quality of life perspective? These are factors that matter. Increasingly so when we look at being a talent magnet and also retaining the workforce that we're building, because we are investing in our students. We want to keep them here. Those are taxpayer dollars that go into public schools as well as our universities and colleges. How do we ensure that they stay here? How do we ensure that they want to stay here? It's not just about the employment, but it's also about quality of life. Florida has been well known for its quality of life. We know that it's a great place to live. There's people that are in snowstorms right now, and we're enjoying great weather. People want to be here, and we see that through our population growth. But how do we ensure that the next generations, as they graduate, that they still want to be here, that they still want to stay here, that we still have the quality of life that we enjoy? Some of you may have seen this. This is the FloridaScorecard.org. It's available on your cell phones, so you can go online, look at it. It's mobile ready. We've made this available to everyone. It's free to the entire public. So several planning organizations use this already. But our measurements, we do statistics data on the 6 pillars: infrastructure, economic development, talent. So we look at 3rd grade reading scores. We look at graduation rates. We look at unemployment numbers. We look at investment flows that are coming in. We look at infrastructure, truck crossings from the state of Florida from Georgia into Florida. So there's a significant amount of data and measurements that comes out of there. And the reason why we came up with the FloridaScorecard.org is that you can't grow if you're not measuring where you're at. So this is a place where we want to ensure that everyone understands what place we're at, where we're measuring from. It's a very easy guide. Green means we're moving in the right direction. Red obviously means we're not. And blue means either we don't have new data or it's kind of static. Same thing with gray. You can click on the tabs and it'll give you the data source. All of it is downloadable. It's all something that we want to make sure that encourage others to use, and as you move on with planning, you can do so. But on the top right corner, you'll see a white box with a drop-down menu. We have this same data not just for statewide, but for all 67 counties. So you can look at your own county, see where you're at, see how you're measuring, see where you're growing. So we're a $1 trillion economy. So to the question about where we ranked, we would be 17th largest economy in the world. Would we be a country? It's kind of a big deal. So it's not just how we compete as a state with other states, but how is Florida competing with the world? And that's part of why we do these measurements, why we look at the data, why we ensure that we have something like the Florida Scorecard, is to give the perspective of where we're at. 21 million residents and counting. And you see the little tickler on the top right. We're tracking on a daily basis how many more people are either being born or moving to the state of Florida. So we're at 21.4 as of Friday. So this number would have updated, so if you're looking at it online, it might be a little bit bigger. Created 241 private sector jobs over the past 8 years. We're at 3.3 out of unemployment rate. 1 out of 11 jobs created in the US were created in Florida. We're a dynamic economic growth engine, which is why workforce, quality of life, those are factors that matter to our economy. We had 118 million visitors. So if you think about not just the 21 million people that live here, but the 118 million visitors that also came into the state. Consider the infrastructure demands and needs for not just our existing population, but the visitors that come in. And then we look at international trade. 1 out of every five jobs is tied to international trade. That's logistics, distribution, warehousing, shipping, a lot of those factors that are tied to just trade, not just what happens in an airport or a seaport, but also what happens landside, the freight movements, and all the demands on our infrastructure systems. And it represents about 25% of our GDP. To answer the question, this is where we'd rank, right below Mexico and Indonesia. And when we're looking at where we want Florida to be in 2030, our goal is for Florida to be the 10th largest economy in the world. That'd be about the size of Canada. Canada's fairly large. But we look at other states that we compete with. Florida is ranked number 3 in population in the US. So there's California, Texas, and Florida. Followed behind us is New York. California, the first most populous state in the country, ranks number 5 in GDP were it be a country. It just surpassed the United Kingdom. So we think about the size of GDPs for the states within the country. Florida is 17th. We're not that far behind considering what we've done and how far we've moved over the years, but it certainly does matter. We look at mega regions, not just population growth, but how are we doing with respect to the Eastern Seaboard, which has been the biggest dynamic mega region in the US. And Florida is a big part of a fairly significant mega region. So how this interacts with other mega regions, what we do here, how that collaborates and contributes to the larger economy of the US certainly matters. Population growth. We're projecting 26 million more people, 26 million population by 2030. That's in 11 years. How are these people going to live? Where are they going to live? How are they going to move? What kind of infrastructure they're going to need? And you're going to have speakers that will talk about autonomous vehicles, freight movement, what goods are they going to consume? How are those goods going to get here? And that's just population. That's not including what the projections are in visitors. We're the #1 visited destination on the planet. Orlando is actually, but that reverberates around the state. Those folks need a lot of resources. And those visitors need to stay somewhere. When we think about not just hotels, but now Airbnb, they're staying in our homes. They're using neighborhood streets. They're not just using the highways. They're using our own neighborhood streets. How are they moving? They're all ordering on Amazon or whatever they're using as a platform. All those deliveries come in. So it's not just how we consume, but also how our visitors are consuming. A large number of our visitors stay here for several months. So they become semi-residents. So for 3 months, they also have needs and demands on our resources. So this is, can't see it too clearly, but this is for this region, District 1. So you're looking at a low end, about 500,000 new residents moving into this area. On the high end, almost 1 million in 11 years. How are they going to move? Where are they going to live? What kind of goods they're going to need, and how are they going to get there? In 2030, about 72% of Florida's population will be concentrated in 9 counties. 2 of those counties are within this district. That's Polk County and Lee County, are one of those 9 top growth counties within the state of Florida. You are adjacent to 3 other large population counties. So while 2 are here, 3 are neighboring counties, Hillsborough, Osceola, and Palm Beach. You'll be impacted by that growth as well, not just directly for this district, but also indirectly through the other counties that are surrounding you. That'll have significant effects throughout what you do and how you plan. So we came up with coordinates for all the 6 pillars, and this is for infrastructure and smart growth. When you download the plan, you'll see it for the other 5 pillars, but in particular, this is where we set the coordinates. The roadmap to get there, each region will have to develop on its own. But what are the goals? How do we want to live? What kind of communities do we want to have? How does this region grow, and what is the roadmap for that region? And we look at what the opportunities might be, from connectivity to diversity, but to also looking at how we achieve housing for all these folks, from either 500,000 on the low end to nearly 1 million people that are going to be living here. How are they going to move? How are they going to choose to move? And not just looking at that population, but also the diversity of that population. Most will be, in their 30s to 40s, but we're also going to have a significant number of seniors. How are they going to move? Where are they going to live? How are they going to want to move? And what choices will be available, and how do you plan for that? So The roadmap is there. These are the coordinates. You can download the plan. I'll share with you more information later, but this is to set the stage. Thank you, Lee.
All right, we're going to another question, so everybody get ready. What percentage of the Florida Department of Transportation budget is funded by federal funds? 25%, 50%, or 75%? There it goes. So about half of you think, oh, most of you think it's 25%. So I don't know why it's not coming up here, but we'll keep going. Secretary Nandum could not be with us today because our brand new FDOT secretary came to District 1 to meet him today. Since that's his new boss, that's where he thought he needed to be. So we have a stand-in, Wayne Gaither, who's going to do an excellent job, I'm sure.
Well, Lee just took my talking points for the first slide that I've got. Yes, Secretary Nandum is meeting with our new FDOT Secretary, Kevin Thibault, and they are discussing District 1 and the plans that we have and that we're implementing for this area. My name is Wayne Gaither. I'm standing in for Secretary Nandum, and I am the Director for the Southwest Area Office, which is located in Fort Myers, Florida. Today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about our department. I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about our work program and our strategic intermodal system, which is Florida's network of high-priority transportation facilities providing the primary means for us to move goods throughout the state, to other states, and to other nations. And then I'd like to close this discussion with how FDOT is working toward the future of transportation for the state of Florida. Under the guidance of our district secretary, we are constantly working towards maintaining strong relationships with our partners. We place a high emphasis on proactive communications and participation in events such as this, where we are promoting a grassroots effort into bringing a vision to the long-range transportation plans that are prepared by the MPOs is a great example of how District 1 works to stay involved. FDOT is always looking for a way to do the right thing when we make our decisions. It's important that decision-making is easy to stand behind, and at the bottom of our heart, we know we've done everything that we could to get to the appropriate solution. In pursuing our mission-critical statement of always doing the right thing, this allows our staff a great leeway in innovative thinking in the pursuit of doing the right thing. FDOT also places a high emphasis on safety and community success. We continue to challenge our folks to focus on reducing fatal and severe injury crashes in every decision they make and to think of the impact of safety in the work that they do. At District 1, we have worked on a safety action plan to ensure that everyone is able to focus on safety. I also believe that the department plays a huge role in helping communities succeed. Transportation plays an important role in the success of communities. As we stay focused on partnering with our communities, this helps us in providing and delivering the services that FDOT prepares. Because of our District 1 Secretary's passion for safety, he was picked as the State Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Champion. And I mention this because if LK was standing here today, he'd be mentioning this to everyone. I'm not going to read through our mission statement, but I do want to point out that we have highlighted some of the important aspects of our mission and vision statement. Our vision is to have zero fatalities and zero congestion on our system. Our mission also focuses on economic prosperity and the quality of our communities. Every year, we receive revenue projects which define our allocations. The statewide transportation funding priorities are specified in Florida statutes, and they are consistent with the Florida Transportation Plan. This plan is the single overarching statewide plan guiding Florida's transportation future. It is the plan for all of Florida, created by and providing guidance to FDOT and to all other organizations who are involved in planning and managing FDOT's transportation system, whether that be statewide, regional, or local. Safety is, of course, our top priority. It's mixed into everything that we do. And next, we have the resources that are allocated to ensure that our existing transportation system is properly maintained. At the same time, we ensure resources are allocated in accordance with statutory requirements, and there are a lot of statutes out there that tell exactly how these resources will be used. The remainder is allocated to 75% of our funds going to our SIS system and 25% to the districts according to the statutory formulas. Over the years, the department has received some additional revenue streams, which is certainly good news for the district. However, when additional revenue was provided, there are statutes that say how these funds will be used. As a result, this increased amount of budget falls under the statutory requirements section of our budget. We report our performance to the Florida Transportation Commission, whose members are appointed by the governor. We tell the FTC what it is we're going to deliver, and at the end of the year, we tell them how we did in delivering these promises to you. The executive board, which is comprised of the secretary, assistant secretaries, and the district secretaries, meets every month to review how we're doing in meeting our accomplishments. On top of that, we go through several internal and external financial audits of programs, projects, and funds to ensure we remain in compliance. I wanted to cover a little bit about our strategic intermodal system cost feasible plan, because this is where, because of the amount of investment that goes toward this system and the critical nature of this system toward the success of the state. Similar to the long-range transportation plans and the cost feasible plans that the MPOs go through, our SIS planning department works on a needs plan to meet the ever-demanding transportation needs of Florida. The SIS unfunded needs plan gathers information from aviation, highway, rail, seaport, spaceport, and transit projects for the SIS, as well as the proposed future SIS eligible facilities. These improvements are not constrained by cost, and they are not included in the department's work program. They are provided in present-day dollar cost, and there is no commitment to fund or build these projects. This is for the identification of capacity needs for mobility based on growth and travel demands. With unfunded needs of over $100 billion and a time horizon of roughly 25 years, we must be looking for new ways as to how this infrastructure can be used and how technology could be impacting the changes needed for these infrastructure types. As a quick recap, the SIS cost feasible plan is required by statute. Through FDOT's process of maintaining and enhancing our strategic intermodal system, we take our highest prioritized projects and advance them into our SIS second 5-year plan, which then feeds into our 5-year work program. Essentially, we are working our way down from taking a look at what we need to what... Thank you. To what we can budget. We work closely with our local partners through the metropolitan planning organizations to use this information in their long-range plans. While this process reviews a significant amount of our transportation network over a long time frame, FDOT recognizes there can also be a lot of change that takes place over the lifespan of our SIS long-range plan. To keep our data and analysis current, the SIS long-range cost-feasible plan is updated every 3 to 5 years. And here we just have a few of the notable projects that have been funded through our cost-feasible plan. There we go. While focusing on the current needs and planning for the future, we need to ensure that we are prepared for the technologies that are coming with the future. FDOT is actively pursuing and testing several technologies to prepare for the future and in developing policies and implementing testing grounds to review the benefits of these new technologies. At the Intelligent Transportation System of America International Conference, FDOT received an award for our forward-thinking approach and the efforts into testing these new technologies. We have prepared several white papers on different topics ranging from policy to infrastructure and preparing for these changes. Recently, we provided written guidance to the MPOs to help them navigate through their long-range transportation plan update process how to reflect these new technologies. New technologies may fundamentally alter the way people travel in the future, with potentially dramatic impacts on safety, mobility, and system performance over the next 20 to 30 years. The pace of technology adoption is quickening. All right, so here's where I'm going to put faith in the internet and just start rattling off some of the stats that I was able to pull. It took us 35 years to adopt to landline telephones, but only 13 years to adopt to mobile phones. 16 years for people to adopt to personal computers, but the World Wide Web was built out in less than half that time. And it's been a little over 10 years since Apple introduced the first iPhone. And I will let you decide how the iPhone and its following Android phones have impacted our lives. So how do transportation agencies decide how and when to invest in these new technologies? What's the next transportation technology that Americans will adopt? Will it be autonomous vehicles? Or will it be a connected network of vehicles and infrastructure where vehicles are in constant contact with each other and the roadway features, potentially creating a crashless driving environment? As you can imagine, each of these technologies can pose its own set of challenges. Electric vehicles pose the challenge related to revenue because FDOT works off of gas taxes. Connected vehicles have the need for infrastructure to communicate with each other. Rideshare companies pose a different challenge with changes to the multimodal splits, meaning are people going to be traveling on buses? Third-party vendor services such as Uber or Lyft, or are they going to bike and walk a little more often? And what will these changes have? What kind of impacts will these changes have on our infrastructure? Finally, we have the autonomous vehicles and the lack of clarity on the pace at which this technology is going to take over the fleet that's currently using our system. How could connected autonomous vehicles work in our system? Drivers could receive notifications or alerts of dangerous situations, such as someone about to run a red light as they're nearing an intersection, or an oncoming car out of sight, beyond a curve, swerving into their lane to avoid an object that's in the road. This will obviously require a significant amount of investment from the private sector to design the systems that can create either a safer driver or a safer vehicle. However, much of the data that's needed, such as signal information, delays, or accident information, could end up coming from FDOT, and this would require a larger investment from FDOT in compiling data and making it available in a much more timely fashion. There's no limit to the potential safety benefits with connected vehicle technologies. Some would require input from FDOT, which are highlighted on the screen behind me, such as providing warning to drivers about potential signal change or potential violation of a red light, approaching emergency vehicles, tight curves ahead, warnings not to pass based on approaching vehicle speeds, providing travel or weather condition, bridge clearance information for commercial vehicles, crash ahead warnings to reduce secondary crashes, or for allowing trucks to platoon for greater efficiencies. In addressing our part of how to implement these new technologies, District 1, District 5, and Turnpike are part of a connected autonomous vehicle proving ground involving UCF, Florida Polytech, NASA, Orlando, Florida, the Orlando International Airport, and Cape Canaveral. SunTrax is centrally located between Tampa and Orlando in Polk County. It is a large-scale, state-of-the-art facility dedicated to research, development, and testing of emerging transportation technologies, providing a safe, controlled environment in which to test. SunTrax is a 475-acre facility that's being built out in 2 phases. Phase 1 will allow the continued testing of current and future toll technologies. This includes the construction of a 2.25-mile multi-lane test track and tolling gantries. Phase 1 will also include the construction of operations buildings, storage buildings, and access roads. Construction began in July of 2017 and is slated to be finished in the spring of 2019. Phase 2 includes an infield track, and this will focus on the connected automated vehicle testing infrastructure. This is also going to require an extensive amount of input from our industry partners, the private sector, basically letting us know what's needed and what they need to be looking at. Construction is expected to begin on this in September of 2019, and we hope to conclude this in the spring of 2021. With the advancement of these new technologies, or the anticipated build-out of urbanized areas on growth projections, we will be looking at changes in how we use transportation and how it is integrated into our development patterns. And this is a great segue into another one of District 1's innovative new moves to improve our end product for transportation, which are transportation networks. FDOT is and will continue working with the MPOs, the counties, and the local municipalities to gather input regarding development patterns, smart growth concepts that are being implemented, and visions of their specific areas. This work will be enhanced through our planning studio, who we had in the back during lunch, and I believe we'll be back there again as well during the breaks and after the workshop session. This work will be integrated into our existing process of developing and building our work program with the purpose of providing projects that are better incorporated into the context of the areas that they will be serving. Additionally, District 1 is pursuing the concept of transportation systems management and operations. TSMO is a relatively new and innovative approach to making our roads safer and more reliable by working with our local partners to ensure proactive communication in our efforts to achieve community success by collectively maintaining our transportation networks. This is an example of implementing best practices and lessons learned over time and broadening our reach to work with our local partners. And with that, I hope I provided you with some useful information, and thank you for your time.
Unlike many other states, only 25% of Florida's transportation budget is federal. Many others, we may be one of the lowest. Our state has a huge investment in transportation. Our legislature recognizes the importance of infrastructure to our economy. Let's try another question. We'll see if we can get it to work. It's a good thing I know what the answers are, in case it doesn't. Do you think more consideration should be given to transportation when developing land use plans? This one's working. District 1 has made a significant investment in this link between land use and transportation with the development of the planning studio, and we hope you'll visit them in the back when we adjourn this afternoon. All right. Where do you buy most of your gasoline for your vehicle? Racetrack, Speedway, Wawa, or someplace else? All right, we're going to ask Dave Sanford to help us answer this question and why this question matters as we talk about Port Manatee. And it's important to the region, not just to Manatee and Sarasota counties.
Thank you, Lee. It's an interesting question for Port Manatee because from our perspective, it doesn't matter. We supply all of them, every drop. And in fact, during fuel emergencies, when there's storm events on the east coast of Florida, our trucks go there. So we have a very, very broad distribution area, which really is a good lead-in for me because I would just tweak the title just slightly. I would call it Preparing to Move More Freight, Fuel, and Food, because we're out there doing it and have been for 50 years, 365, 24/7, during hurricanes, whatever, it's flowing. So I'd like to just give you a very, very brief introduction about Port Manatee. You know, we're tucked away up in the northwest corner of Manatee County, and the consumer goods that come by ship that you pick up in your store, it doesn't just materialize. So let me tell you a little bit about that. First, I'd like to recognize the fact that we have probably the most unique governance structure of any seaport in Florida, and there are very few like this, in that the 7 elected county commissioners sat as a Port Authority board. They elect a different chair, and this has many advantages for the port. It connects us to the county. We operate as an independent business, and it gives our customers the feeling that they've got connectivity to the county through our board. So it's a tremendous asset to the port, and it's an important part of our business model. And I'm very pleased today to see our chair, Vanessa Baugh, Commissioner Baugh, and also we've got Commissioner Banak, a former chair, and Commissioner Servia. So they come out to the port, they set as the Port Authority Board, and they provide us with the policy and the steering guidance to operate the port on a day-to-day basis. You know, the key word here is jobs. And it's all part of the preparation. You know, Southwest Florida, we're your port, and we're growing with you. Business is booming. And what that means is we're creating jobs, providing opportunities for more economic development, and that's really what we're about. We just happen to be a seaport, but we're in the economic development and job creation business. We are, in any given year, either the 4th or 5th largest seaport in Florida. And, you know, for seaports, it's a lot like real estate, location, location, location. And setting at the mouth of Tampa Bay, right in the heart of this area of huge growth, we couldn't be in a better position, and our business shows it. We're growing at double-digit rate, have been for about the last 5 or 6 years, and we see no end in sight. And part of the locational advantage helps drive that business, and that part is the proximity to markets that are growing and consume goods. and that's you guys. You know, in our taking advantage of that location, we rely on partners. FDOT, District 1's just been tremendous to support our infrastructure projects, our planning, and just consultations. Just give you just a little snippet here of what we're doing out there and what we're bringing in, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how we're preparing for that growth. One of the things that we discovered a few years ago is that if you are the one-trick pony model, when you have a little economic downturn, you're in big trouble. And over the past 5 or 6 years, my boss, our executive director, Carlos Bucaras, has worked very hard and very strategically in diversifying the cargo mix at the port. Historically, the port was formed really to serve the agricultural community with fertilizer and fuel. And any dip in one of those commodities just creates havoc. So over the past, again, 5 or 6 years, we have made it a very integral part of our planning is to diversify the customer base and the commodities that we handle. We recently did a sensitivity test for the Port Authority Board on what would be the impact of a recession on Port Manatee. And using 2008 as a base against today and a reasonable projection of the future, we believe that a major recession would today have a minimal impact on the port's business. We might lose 10%. But again, that type of planning is part of the preparation for the future. We handle metals, tropical fruits, forest products, fuel, as was mentioned earlier. Fuel and orange juice are two of the largest growing products that we handle. And the fuel is a no-brainer, you know, it's about consumption. But I have read repeatedly about the drop in the consumption of orange juice. I couldn't prove it because we're growing the import of orange juice in double digits. As the Florida juice has a temporary decline, the import juice has made up the difference. As new hotels come online, they're consuming even more juice than they have in the past. And the sugar content might have put off a few folks, but honestly, the Brazilian juice is coming in because it has a high sugar content and satisfies the American taste. So we see that business continuing well into the future as Florida orange industry comes back and they lick the greening problem, and we believe they will eventually. Then that product will moderate. But there has always been a market for both Brazilian and Mexican juices for blending, and that will probably continue well into the future. And the gasoline business is just going gangbusters. Every time you see a new gas station go up, you know where it came from. You know, we've talked a little bit this morning about the global aspect of business, and we are in a global business. I would suggest that all of us in the transportation business are in the global business. It might look local, but particularly being here in Florida with the tourist economy, the transportation system, whether we're importing goods into the country or just simply moving, it's global. I'd like to turn to the future. We, of course, do master planning. we take a 20-year look, and we attempt to adjust that every 5 years. I missed one there. There it is. Now I'm caught up. See, I miss you, Virginia. She usually does this for me. But at any rate, you know, as a career planner in my past life, what I recognize is the fact that it's absolutely necessary to do long-range planning, but you're seldom right, okay? So what you do is you take those little 3 to 5 year snippets that you've got some degree of confidence in, you assume success and project that out. And that's exactly what we're doing at Port Manatee in our master planning process. With the growth that we're experiencing and the facility utilization that we have at the port, we have to do this. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. Now, as I stand here today, the warehouses are full. Last weekend, I had 7 ships on the berths. That sounds good, right? Nah, not so much if you want to grow. We have to grow. So we're looking ahead to build 3 new berths and extend a current berth as part of our master planning effort over the next 20 years. New warehouses have to come online. We have road improvements that are in the immediate future that I'm going to talk about in just a second. All those things just have to be a continuing process. And it's basically what I deal with on a day-to-day basis, is to make sure that as we continue to grow our business, we have the facilities to be able to sustain that growth into the future. Now, looking forward on the capital improvements, paving is gold in the port industry. You've got to be able to have places to put things. We were fortunate enough to be able to partner with FDOT, and again, our friends at District 1 have been tremendously helpful in helping us be able to afford the type of projects that we'll need in the future. For example, the expansion of our container yard is just one of them. Berth rehabilitation, we just completed a major $12 million rehab on one of our heavily used berths. Of our 10 current berths, 6 of them require some significant rehab in the future. Our North Gate expansion is absolutely critical to effectively move primarily trucks out of the port. We had over 300,000 vehicle movements through our gate last year. 95% of those are trucks. So, you know, it's important for us to be working with the MPO, be working with FDOT, so that we can coordinate our needs with their planning efforts to make sure that we keep that flowing. We own a railroad. The Port Manatee Railroad has 7 miles of track on port, 2 recently acquired green hybrid locomotives, and that's an integral part of our business. It's one of the things that makes us unique. It's a very unique asset in the port industry, is to have your own short line railroad. So we have now gone probably 30, 40 years without major rehabilitation of the rails and the road bed. Acquired the new equipment. Now the job is to make sure that we keep the rail bed and rails in good condition. So again, working with our partners at FDOT, we're able to do this. Warehouse improvements, I mentioned to you that we're full. Thankfully, we have good throughput so that it comes in, it goes out, and we're ready for the next batch. But as we continue to grow, our current warehouse structures will not be adequate for the future. In fact, what we would like to be able to do is to leverage public-private partnerships and share revenue. It's a model that we think will work for us and benefit local investors in the county. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what we're doing at Port Manatee. Again, we're growing like gangbusters with you and because of you, and we look forward to a bright future. But again, it's all about preparing to move that freight, that food, and that fuel. Thank you.
Time for the question. Were you aware that Port Manatee is eligible to receive strategic intermodal system funding, just like I-75? So as you heard Wayne say earlier, about 75% of the transportation budget of the state goes to the strategic intermodal system, which is our highway network, but it is also connectors to our ports, our seaports, our airports, and our spaceports. So that freight that we all need can move from those ports onto those highways and go to the places where we need it. All right, and here we go. Would you today ride in an autonomous vehicle? Well, Ben, here's your challenge. Ben Walker is here to talk to us about how are we going to get ready for that day when we all have to ride in one.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Looks like I got my work cut out for me, but that's all right. So as Wayne mentioned, we helped write the planning for the future and planning for autonomous, connected electric and shared use vehicles and providing guidance to the MPOs around the state. Just want to make sure we all have the same kind of foundation of what I'm referring to when I talk about autonomous, connected electric or shared use. So autonomous is what's commonly referred to as driverless. So you don't have to have a steering wheel or a pedal. You could, but you don't have to. Connected means it's talking to something. It's talking to other cars, other infrastructure, people. The main point with connected, though, is the driver of the vehicle still has to react to information. So there's no autonomy associated with it. You can have an autonomous car that's not connected. You can have a connected car that's not autonomous, and you can have both. Why electric is important, as was mentioned before, so much of Florida and transportation funding is funded through gas taxes, but as more autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles come online, the electric propulsion is an important part of that, and that's going to really affect a number of different revenue sources. And then shared use, commonly referred to as your transportation network companies or your TNCs, like your Ubers, Lyfts, could be transit as well. And this also has a potential to dramatically change how we have mobility in the future. So why are we doing this? Why are we talking about it? Well, some of the headlines that we see across the nation really emphasize that not just the vehicle manufacturers, but their suppliers are thinking about this, not in 20 years, but within the next 5 years. So we need to start planning for these now because of how soon we're going to start seeing them in the marketplace. Now, I know there's a lot of concern that, hey, people won't give up their cars. They'll always want to drive their cars and own their cars and operate like that. They said the same thing 100 years ago about horses. People will never give up their horses to go with this, loud, noisy vehicle that drives slow. And as a matter of fact, you can still have a horse on most roadway facilities, not your interstates, but Florida statutes still allow for horses to be on the right-of-way. But you don't see this in many parking lots, do you? There is a time in the future where people will vote their transportation with their wallet. What makes the most sense for them financially to move around the country, whether it be autonomous, whether it go back to horses, what makes that business sense? Oh, almost had the timing right. So Federal Highway came out with 6 different scenarios of how autonomous and connected vehicles might go forward in the future. And a great amount of credit goes to Federal Highway for thinking this, because it's not going to be a universal adoption moving forward. So what I thought I'd do today is kind of dive into a little bit of the differences, because each region can choose kind of their own adventure of how they see autonomous, connected, electric shared use moving forward, and then plan around that. So let's talk about those that you see, let's call it rose color today, for enhanced driving experience. So the first one being a managed autonomous lane network. So this could be AV-only lanes. This could be a network that the infrastructure is ready for AV use. So you have good signing, good street markings. So you have a good amount of use where autonomous vehicle can safely operate around the region. So you might see these AV-only lanes or AV emphasis areas on our freeways, toll facilities, which traditionally are very well maintained and able to accommodate these new technologies. Where you see transit-only lanes or bus rapid transit lanes might also be an early adopter, or truck-only lanes. Where you're going to see a large benefit for your transportation system is when you have enough of these vehicles on the roadway system, so you have that market penetration, so you can realize some of the potential capacity improvements that might be available. What else is possible, though, with an AV-only lane? Well, you have companies like the picture here on the top, Neuro, that are focusing only on freight. So think about it. When you are not designing your vehicle around a human being in it, that means you don't have to include airbags, rollover cages, and a number of different systems that are built within the vehicle that take human safety into account. So these vehicles that they're currently testing in Arizona are about half the size of a personal-owned car, and it allows them to operate maybe 2 in 1 lane. And to help facilitate that, your Uber Eats or your DoorDash or a lot of these other freight deliveries. Well, what might also be the case if you have a very dense network of autonomous vehicles? Well, you might have a situation in the future where you go into a shopping mall and you say, wow, this place is busy. Look at all these cars. Well, what if they're just autonomous cars waiting to be summoned to go somewhere else? So in actuality, there's nobody there at the mall, but there are all these vehicles just queued up. So how, from a policy standpoint, do we account for the staging areas for autonomous vehicles? It also changes how you design the vehicle itself in the interior, whether you allow for seats to turn around, to have a mobile office, even a sleeping area as well. So another system is the ultimate driver assist, and this is a scenario where maybe AV adoption isn't as prevalent as quick, but connected vehicles become more prevalent. So what the possibilities are is that because of them being connected, you do have these warning systems that drivers are able to react to we do see less accidents and less crashes. However, there's a trade-off, right? If we have all these sensors now built into the vehicle, they're going to be more expensive to fix. So there's kind of that double-edged sword from an insurance company. You have all this great technology that'll prevent accidents, so your insurance rates in theory should drop. But if you need to replace them, now the cost is more. So there's a balance there of what the business community might experience. But we also see the possibilities with better utilization of roadways. So if you have that information at your fingertips, so you don't have to ask, what's the quickest way to my destination, but the vehicle is telling you that based on data it's already receiving, allows you to react, helping minimize those peak hour delays that we see. Also, studies have shown that almost 30% of all congestion around downtown are people looking for where to park. What if you had that information, if it knows you're going to downtown, it tells you where the available parking is because it has that data available. It tells you what the different price models are. So if you park in garage A, it'll cost you $2 an hour. Garage B will cost you $3 an hour. But garage B is closer to where you want to go. You then have that informed decision, informed data, to make those different business decisions. So data is like the new bacon, right? It's so good, but so bad for you too. So what do we do with all this data and how do we manage it, right? So if the car is generating all this data, if it's talking to signals, so the signals are receiving the data, and those signals are operated by a government agency, then who owns that data? For how long? Who can access that data? So there's a lot of different business models and business cases associated with data privacy, data ownership, data retention. So that's going to be a new way of how people react to and utilize the different data sets that are going to be available out there. It can also provide real-time information on where potential crashes may be based on the vehicles ahead saying, hey, the vehicle ahead of you just applied its skid resistance or applies emergency brakes, so be careful. So being able to identify before accidents happen is going to be important as well. So the most boring of all the scenarios is called the slow roll. Basically, this is the do-nothing alternative. If government just does nothing to accommodate connected or autonomous vehicles, what can happen? Well, basically, you're going to see a lot of what we see today with auto ownership trends continuing at its current pace, and a lot of the potential benefits with safety and with mobility might not be realized as quick as if governments or regions adopted more CAV-friendly legislation or policies. The pictures you see on this screen actually are the one on your left is from a place in Europe, actually, where they realized, hey, there might be some time before connected autonomous vehicles could come online, but pedestrian safety is still important to us. And they looked at the pedestrians utilizing the roadway and the facilities, and they realized everybody's looking down on their smartphones. So why are we putting signs at eye level? We need to put signs in the pavement. So that's why you see that red line there in the pavement telling the pedestrians, stop, because we know you're not looking up. So pedestrian safety, bicycle safety are still going to be important no matter what scenario for CAV adoption is possible. But what else is possible? We're also starting to see new and different types of sidewalk and pavement. This is a solar sidewalk. And what the unique instances where this is it's being applied in front of businesses. So as every time somebody steps on this sidewalk, it creates 9 seconds of power to the nearby street light. So you're seeing an increased pedestrian safety because now you have better illumination. Now your electricity cost, either from the business paying for that electrical or the government, they're going down as well. So it's not just thinking about just the different types of transportation technology, but how can they be applied to the entirety of the transportation corridor? It's going to be exciting moving on in the future. So moving on to shifting from everybody owning a car, whether it be autonomous or connected, to really being more of a mobility consumer. And this really relies a little bit heavier on autonomous vehicles as opposed to connected, but it can be both. You can't have both autonomous and connected. So if this happens in your niche service area, so let's just say autonomous vehicles are realized most in the downtowns or college campuses, master plan communities, or tourist areas where you have a very defined urban area. Auto ownership, or the cost of auto ownership, might today be traditionally higher because of parking lot costs or the availability of parking. So people are looking for other opportunities rather than own a car. These are opportunities where you might see in regions of a niche service growth where you might have a lot of AV ownership in these areas as opposed to maybe your suburban areas or other outlying rural areas. But what else is possible then when you have this type of system? Well, the need for parking, of course, might change. If you do have parking, maybe they can be parked closer together and not have such wide spaces, so you can include more parking spaces in a traditional garage because you don't have the doors needing to be open. People can be dropped off right in front of their area. So if we had the death tax before, we have a new kind of possible tax called the zombie tax, right? So what happens? How do you charge a company that is operating a zero person vehicle to get to you? How does that cost get translated to that? So, the many different types of funding options out there are, I don't know if this one's going to stick, but at least charging a company or some way, because there's still an impact to the infrastructure, whether there's a person in there or not. So we might need to be thinking about how we design and redesign our curb space. So it's not thinking about the parking lots in the future and how people go from the parking lot into the building itself, but thinking about how we can make sure that the streets in front of the buildings still operate smoothly, that we take aside those pickup and drop-off areas, allowing for better use of autonomous vehicles to do that. So what our studies have shown is it's an important trade-off of what you view in the region. A lot of regions have, as part of their long-range goals, driving down vehicle miles of traveled or vehicle hours of traveled, because in essence that means less congestion, which is an admirable goal, absolutely. You also have goals of driving down pedestrian crashes and fatalities and automobile fatalities and crashes. Well, what if those two goals conflict with each other in the future with autonomous vehicles, where if 94% of all crashes are because of the human driver, we take out the human driver, and now we have more autonomous vehicles. Well, your crashes might go down, but your VMT might go up because you're providing so much more mobility to people who can't drive, who now have access to be able to go to different places, different facilities. And if you're not worried about parking costs, now you might take several different trips. So vehicle miles of travel might go up, but your safety might go way down. So it's understanding what those trade-offs could be in the future, and planning for them in your regional vision is going to be important. Also thinking about charging infrastructure. When you look at your parking lots, do we need to start requiring a certain number of charging for these new types of CAV vehicles that are predominantly electric? You have entire countries like France and Germany saying the combustible engine will not be sold by 2030 in those countries. So the future is definitely going to be electrically driven. But what else is possible when you have an autonomous car? What does really that look like within your right-of-way? Well, this is a great example of, hey, we can't just plan for an autonomous car, because if we think about space, taking people from a car to an autonomous car, you might still have the same level of congestion. Is that really what you want? And how do you plan around it? So with competing fleets, that's exactly what it is. It's autonomous vehicles that are operating autonomously, but they don't talk to each other for maximum benefit. So it's the Fords only talking to the Fords, or the GMs only talking to the GMs. And they're not looking to stage or platoon or really maximize the possibilities that are out there with technology. But now let's go to the coolest of the futures, right? Where it's Robo Transit. So it's basically on-demand, autonomous, connected. They're all working in perfect harmony. They're talking to each other, so you have the maximum benefits possible for your infrastructure. So vehicles, it doesn't have to be just a vehicle or just a truck to be in a platoon. It can be vehicles as well. I dream of the day where, you really can't see it from way in the back, but a food truck platoon comes before me, so I have several different options available. But we don't just think about what might be from a personal use as well and operating on the road. When we talk about the technology that's possible out there, let's not just think about the road. Let's think about going airborne as well. So if you saw the news recently, Boeing just announced they operated their first autonomous air taxi service. So what does that look like in reshaping the future? Audi has shown their vision of the vehicle only being used for first and last mile. So you would basically get in a pod, a drone would come pick you up and take you, and then you can dock to the car to take you where you ultimately want to go. The vehicle on the lower left of the screen here, autonomous freight. So you don't need a cab anymore. So long distance freight hauling is completely different. Right now, there is an autonomous freight company operating from Naples to Miami. They have a safety driver in there, but they're not engaging. And that includes refueling the semi-truck. It's an amazing operation. That's the possibilities of technology that is out there today. And wouldn't it be cool to get 30 minutes of extra sleep if you can redesign the interior of a car to include a bed before you go to work? So let's talk about how we do this. It really needs to be an iterative process. So you look at your region's goals, look at the possibilities of technology that are out there, and make sure they're aligned with each other. And I wanted to leave you with just a couple key points of looking to the future. When we talk about safety, it's important that the technology be used to increase the amount of safety that's on our systems. But we also don't create a safety hazard. With these connected vehicles, providing more information, that it's not overloading the driver, that they're getting so much information from their vehicle, from the roadside signs, from all this other infrastructure, that in itself is becoming a distraction. So we want to make sure that we advance this technology smartly as well. We talk about transit. So yes, some transit trips might go the way of Ubers or Lyfts, but how can they work in concert with each other? So we think about transit and really being mobility managers. So you have that one-stop shop. So you think about the options available to you, whether it's scooter, whether it's bike, whether it's transit, whether it's autonomous vehicle. How can that be a single application where you can look at the technology knows your preferences so that you can make an informed decision and maybe take many different modes to ultimately go where your destination is. When we talk about funding, yes, the fuel tax is an important part, but it's not the only part of it. When you look at how municipalities, counties, and states fund transportation, fuel tax is a part of it. But how much from a local perspective are you funding other government services through your parking, through traffic citations? In an autonomous future, those cars are going to be programmed not to violate the law, not to need to park. So we need to think about, from a local government perspective, how do we continue funding these services that are currently being supported by parking fines, by speeding tickets, by other types of traffic violations. In the planning process, I mentioned about data. Data is certainly going to be important. Data privacy is going to be important as well. Data storage is going to be incredibly important. How we utilize this data is going to be very, very important, and think about how we kind of make that shift and that pivot towards more real-time data being available to many different users. And finally, engagement, and what a great question. Engagement is going to be absolutely critical, so people become familiar with the technology, feel comfortable in it, and utilize it if it's the most appropriate for them. Understanding what the possibilities are, what they are today, what they can be in the future, and what they aren't today, as a matter of fact. I've had the very fortune to ride in an autonomous semi and autonomous transit, so I understand what their limitations are so that we manage expectations accordingly in our communities. So it's not going to be overnight that we see autonomous vehicles running everywhere. because there's going to have to be that integration of the market. People just aren't going to give up their cars immediately. So there's going to be that transition. How does that take into account in the future? And as we saw in Arizona, where the autonomous cars were being attacked by adults because they didn't want them in their neighborhoods. I can't tell you why, but that's going to be important so that people have an understanding and familiarity and comfort with autonomous vehicles. That's my show. Thank you.
So this is going to be a fun question. Ready? When do you think your community can be ready for autonomous vehicles? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, more than 15 years? We got our work cut out for us. You do. All right. Moving up, literally and figuratively. How many space launches took place from Florida in 2017? 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, or over 40? I hope Mark Bontrager knows the answer. All right, no middle ground here. Oh, there we go. I'm constantly amazed when I'm traveling and say that I used to live on the Space Coast, and people go, "Oh, didn't that close?" Hear it all the time. But Mark's here to tell you a completely different story.
Thanks, Lee. And what Lee won't tell you is that she played a major role in a renaissance that we're seeing on the Space Coast, actually across the state of Florida, as we're seeing commercial industry step up and play a major role in space. I'm Mark Bontrager. I'm the Vice President for Spaceport Operations with Space Florida. We're a statewide organization headquartered over on the Space Coast. And we're really seeing a really pretty exciting time. For the last 50 years, the federal government has been the dominant player in space transportation for all the right reasons. The Department of Defense needed to go to space to kill people and break things, and NASA needed to go to space to explore. But just in the last 10 years or so, 10 to 15, we've seen the advent of a true commercial space industry. The billionaires are playing the major heavy lift right now in that domain with Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com, Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX, and other companies that are really kind of in the forefront of what we're really seeing as a new transportation mode. And I think you can be really proud of Florida because Florida looks at space as a mode of transportation, unlike most other states. And because Florida looks at space as a mode of transportation, we've been able to cooperate with the Florida DOT to put in place tools that enable that business to come to Florida, where it could go many other places. So I have the privilege of telling you some stories today about space and what's happening, and here we are on the west coast of Florida. I'm driving over thinking, how can I make this relevant to this crew? When you think about it, a couple key points. First of all, we all use space, and I have a few slides on that in a minute, but every county in Florida has companies involved in space and aerospace. We do a study every year in preparation for our yearly trek to Tallahassee to remind our legislators how important space is to Florida. Every county in Florida has a significant number of companies and a significant number of jobs in the space domain. We all use space every day. Think about it. Communications. If you make a phone call, you're using space. Weather. We all use space when we had to deal with the hurricanes we've had the last few years. GPS. How many of us use GPS to get here today? Remote sensing. We are constantly looking down at the Earth and are sensing all kinds of cool things. The sun does amazing things to our atmosphere. And frankly, we love to explore. As human beings, exploration is a big deal. And by the way, this just happened a few weeks ago when the Mars lander came down on Mars. It was a pretty significant event. And as we continue to explore into the universe, we're going to see that continue to grow. So not only do we all use space, we all use it every day. We use it frequently. But it's also a big business. The aerospace business globally is about $800 billion. The space business is about a $383 billion business. Now, if you look at these charts, I know it's far away, but the bottom two, the blue and the red on the space chart are really the commercial space business. The bulk of the business in space is commercial. The government still play a major role in it, but they're not the dominant players. Fascinating. When you know it's commercial space, those companies can vote with their feet. They can choose to decide where they're going to place their business. And it can be in Florida, and it can be all over the state of Florida. Significant opportunity on that front. And then think about communications. We're seeing some pretty neat things happen in the communications domain. Right now, 50% of the world does not have access to the internet. Think about that for a minute. 50% of the globe does not have access to the internet. And there's a Florida-based company called OneWeb. The guy that runs OneWeb got tired of laying fiber in Africa. He said there's got to be a better way than laying fiber across the middle of nowhere. And so he came up with this model of about 850 satellites in low Earth orbit, providing global broadband, opening up half of the world to the internet. Now, this guy has actually done a good job. It's not just an idea. He's actually secured some pretty significant investors like Airbus, like Coca-Cola. Think about it. You can put a Coke machine in the middle of nowhere. You can get Coke there. You got solar power. Now you got comm. You're good. So there's tremendous interest. SpaceX is doing the same thing with a company called Starlink, 4,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. So we're seeing a pretty significant development happening here in Florida with satellites and communication to connect the world. So that private sector dominance is really where the innovation's happening. If you go back 50 years, who was doing the innovating? The federal government. DARPA, the DOD, those were the guys on the cutting edge of innovation. Now we're seeing industry are the ones kind of leading and on the cutting edge of innovation, and that's just going to continue. Now, why is this important to us as Floridians? Well, if you look at historically, in 1980, 100% of commercial launch activity took place from the United States, either from Florida or California. And that all has to do with certain orbits you can get to, 100%. By 2010, 100% of that business went overseas, to Russia, China, France, India. We lost the entire market. Just in the last 5 years, SpaceX, ULA, a little bit of Blue Origin are starting to bring that business back to the United States. And we're up to about 40% of the global business is back in the U.S., and a big chunk of it is from here in Florida. But it's really a global competition. You can get to space from anywhere on the surface of the Earth, theoretically. So if you look at the spaceport infrastructure around the globe, the Cape Canaveral Spaceport here in Florida is one of the largest. You also have another one in Russia. China is growing significantly, and India is growing significantly. It's a competition, and it's not just a competition domestically. It's an international competition. And so where we have historically said, well, hey, where else are you going to launch a rocket from but in Florida, right? Well, there are other places, and they're growing, and they have opportunities to compete with us in that front. So you have an organization here in Florida called Space Florida, and that's who I get to work with and work for. And our job is to make Florida the best place in the world for aerospace business. We have a statewide charter. We're a developmental authority for Florida's spaceport system. We have 2 spaceports in Florida today, and that's going to grow. Because as we see the technology develop, there'll be opportunity for more spaceports in Florida. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We're an independent special district as opposed to the Port Manatee. We're independent, they're dependent. I don't know what difference that makes, but it sounds kind of cool. But we are a state chartered organization, and we have a developmental role that is statewide. Some of our tools can be deployed anywhere across the state on special dirt, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we're a spaceport authority, really primarily focused on those spaceports. We can own infrastructure, we can develop land, we can do those kind of things that a spaceport or any kind of authority can do, port authorities, etc. We also are an economic development organization. And we have special tools that we can apply across the state on special dirt. And these are some of those tools. Matter of fact, there's a deal we closed recently up in the Tampa area, at the airport in Tampa, public dirt. We can bring some of our tools to bear to bring financing to help close a deal for a company to come to Florida and create jobs. And we can do that anywhere, like I said, in public land across the state. If it's within our charter, within that aerospace and defense charter is part of what Space Florida and why we exist. As far as spaceports go, you have 2 spaceports in Florida. A lot of people don't realize that. We have one up in Jacksonville. It's the old Cecil, used to be Cecil Field, a naval air station that was bracked in the mid-90s. They secured their own FAA license, and they've got their first launch scheduled for later this year. So that's a big deal for the Jacksonville team. The Cape Canaveral Spaceport is certainly the home of space for the United States and access to space, and that's where a significant amount of growth is happening. When we look at the space industry, we look and see that there's a lot of similarities and cross-flow between space, aviation, and aerospace. A lot of the skill sets needed to do space are also necessary for all these other industries that have a statewide presence. And as I said earlier, we're seeing the innovation happen in the commercial sector. And so I just have a few slides. They're really kind of the fun things that we've seen happen over the last few years in the space domain. And you're all welcome to come over to the Space Coast and watch a rocket land. It's the coolest thing in the world. For the last 50 years, we've been throwing rockets away. You launch them once, it's like building a 747, flying it once, right? And Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, said, hey, why are we doing it? We got to think about reusing rockets. And so now, in most of the SpaceX launches they're launching, they're flipping over, rocketing back toward Florida, and landing vertically, either on the Cape or on a barge. It's pretty neat to see those kind of things happen. So SpaceX broke the code in changing the world, so we are now reusing rockets. As a matter of fact, they're marketing them better. They're saying this is flight-proven rocket. Whereas you used to throw them away, you can pay a little bit more and get yourself a flight-proven rocket instead of a new one. How about that? What a great country. To give you a sense of kind of what this looks like, this is, let's see if it'll advance for me. Lee, what am I doing here? There we go. Oh, I advanced too fast. It's a video that needed to load. This is really what it looks like as a rocket comes back. It's falling from space. See if I can get this bad boy to play. There you go. It's falling from space, and about 3 seconds before it slams into the deck, the engine lights, and it slows itself down and comes to a vertical landing right there on the Cape. The triple sonic boom when these things come back is fantastic. It's deafening. There's nothing like it. It's really fun. Another company, Blue Origin, founded by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, is currently doing a lot of reusable launch activity in Texas with the new Shepherd. A tremendous amount of reusability. Reusability is at the base of the business case for these commercial companies. They can't close a business case without being able to reuse the rockets. And so a lot of flights happening in Texas with Blue Origin, and they'll talk about their next generation rocket they're building at the Cape. Just last year, we brought a rocket, actually a couple years ago now, we brought the Air Force's top secret space plane back to the shuttle landing facility. Shuttle landing facility was a 3-mile runway right there on the Cape where the space shuttle used to land. It had been sitting fallow and doing nothing since the shuttle flew out. And then the Air Force decided to use it, and we'd been working with them for a number of years, and they brought the X-37B back to the Cape. That rocket, believe it or not, that space plane, believe it or not, starts in orbit, comes out of orbit, flies across the United States, and then comes across the state of Florida and lands at the Cape. There are other commercial missions that are underway right now, a company called Sierra Nevada that is doing work for NASA, which will launch what's called the Dream Chaser from the Cape. It'll go to the International Space Station. It'll release from the space station and glide to a landing at the Cape, flying right over southwest Florida. So that'll be a big deal when that happens here a few years from now. So it's going to be, you'll hear a good sonic boom as that thing comes across the state like the shuttle used to do. The Falcon Heavy, commercial Falcon Heavy launch vehicle lifting significant payload. This was kind of neat. The first time they did this was a test launch. Did you guys see that where Elon put a Tesla in orbit? It's actually on its way to Mars. So that was a pretty neat public event. You know, that was a really brilliant idea. It was just a test, but he put a Tesla in space. It's pretty cool. Blue Origin, company founded by Jeff Bezos, just built a 650,000 square foot factory on the Space Coast and Exploration Park. This rocket is 313 feet tall, longer than a football field. It's 24 feet in diameter. When they were debating on where they were going to go launch from, they knew they had to build their rocket facility in close proximity because you can't drive this thing across the open roads. It's too big. And so it's going to be an amazing capability. Its first launch is scheduled for 2021 out of the Space Coast on the Cape. Remember I talked earlier about the satellites? OneWeb is building satellites now in Florida. 850 satellites. They're going to be pushing out 15 satellites a week. Right now, it takes about 2 years to build a satellite. They're handcrafted deals. This is really the Model T factory of the next generation of satellites. 15 satellites a week they're going to be pushing out of this facility. And then you have horizontal launch and landers. A company called Virgin Orbit will be starting launch service this year. Virgin Galactic, going to be flying out of New Mexico, will be doing space tourism later this year out of New Mexico. Eventually, they'll come to Florida. Whether it's the Cape, or here on the West Coast, or up in Jacksonville, there's tremendous opportunities. People want to see where they grew up from space, and that's a neat opportunity for Florida to take advantage of it. If we look at the history, the left side shows you kind of how it was in 2016. The right side shows where it's going. Significant growth and investment happening in the space domain. If you look at the launch activity, as Lee said, last year we saw 20 launches. In 2017 we saw 20 launches. That launch activity is going to grow. We've got 32 planned for this year. The 45th Space Wing, who runs the Eastern Range, is planning for 48. And we are publicly saying we're going to see between 100 and 200 launches a year. When you see that kind of activity, you start to create a bit of a challenge because now you're threatening the air traffic domain. And so I wanted to take a few minutes at Lee's request, talk a bit about airspace. Airspace is governed by the FAA. It's a limited commodity. There's roughly 55,000 flights a day over the entire national airspace system. And as you can imagine, flying in and out of Florida is a very, very busy place. Whenever we launch a rocket from the Cape, the FAA clears, in some cases, 15,000 square miles of space, airspace, that airplanes can't fly through because we're going to send a rocket through it. Well, the good news is the FAA is leaning forward and trying to figure out this problem, and there's tremendous dialogue going on right now between the space community and the air community, and they're skinnying down the corridors to allow kind of joint use of the airspace, keeping it safe, number one priority, but allowing rockets and airplanes to be able to coexist within that precious commodity of airspace. And so far, they're really making some pretty great progress. If you asked me a couple years ago if we were worried about whether or not we were going to be able to still launch rockets from Florida and have airplanes fly through the space, I said, well, yes, it's going to be a challenge. We're now seeing the problem solving's happening, and I don't think we're too concerned about that. We also spend a lot of time thinking about the future, just like you're doing here. What does the future look like? The Jetsons, or kind of like a space zone? And frankly, it's probably going to be some combination of both as we play it out. As we look at it from a state perspective, we see the human species starting to leap off the surface of the earth in a pretty significant way over the next 20, 30, 50 years. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com, the vision for Blue Origin, the vision for Blue, is millions of people living and working in space. Think about that. Millions of people living and working in space. That's a lot of people. You've got to get them there. You got to get them back. You got to feed them. You got to clothe them. You got to get them water. You got to get them entertainment. You got to get them all the things that human beings need to survive. Where is that going to happen? Doesn't have to be the United States. Could be Russia. Could be China. Could be India. We'd like to see it be Florida. A lot of times you'll hear us compare Florida and our vision for Florida as London. London was the hub of the seafaring trade when we started trading across the seas. If you were in the business of seafaring and freight and logistics in that day, you were based out of London. The bankers were there, the contracts people were there, the accountants, all the freight and logistics professionals were all there in London. We see Florida has an opportunity to be the hub of the spacefaring generation and the place where you exist, where your business is located, where your people are located, where your quality of life is, to enable space transportation to go to the next level. And you often see us think and talk often about a commercial space trade port. And it's going to be bigger than just the Space Coast. It's going to be a statewide opportunity. And so In light of that, the nation has taken a look at this, and they've reestablished the National Space Council. For the last 15 years or so, each federal agency worked kind of independently in its own stovepipe and focused on its own unique problems within its space transportation domain. Now, under the National Space Council, you have a joint interagency focus, with Commerce playing a major role in this domain, DoD certainly, NASA, and the Department of Transportation. Space is a mode of transportation. It's pretty neat to see US DOT stepping on board that front as well. From a Florida perspective, in 2004, the United States put out a coin, a quarter, and the Florida quarter had the space shuttle on it, and it said Gateway to Discovery. From a Space Florida perspective, we'd like to see the next Florida coin make sure it has space on it as well. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoyed this planning session y'all are doing today. Thank you.
Question time. As we look at competing airspace, there's also the drones, and this is also being addressed by the FAA. So think about it, they clear they clear the entire state for one rocket launch. No planes can fly. Now we've got drones. So do you or someone you know personally own or fly a drone right now? There's a lot of questions about drones. There's a lot of security questions. Ben raised some of those. But the reality is drones for delivery, things like that, can take cars off the road. So it's something we're going to have to think about as we do our long-range plans. What is the most important factor to increase space research in the state of Florida? More federal funding, better cooperation among Florida universities, more private funding, more state funding. Mark, how would you answer that? B, better cooperation among Florida universities. All right, let's wrap it up. Alice? She's going to really challenge us.
All right, so I'm in between you and the rest of your day. I'll try not to keep you too long. One of the things that I did not mention early on, I've been part of planning processes for a couple of years. I was on the steering committee for the last FTP study process, as well as the SIS plan. FMTP as well, and the Florida Chamber also released its Trade and Logistics Studies 1.0 in 2010 and 2.0 in 2013. Part of my job is to keep those activities running, and we're now going to start the process for our next Trade and Logistics Study 2030. So that begins in February, and we start gearing up towards those planning processes in coordination with FDOT as well as the various MPOs and districts. We look at disruption. The rate of disruption is obviously happening much faster. Average rate is about 3 years, and it's disruption around multiple industries all at the same time. So it's simultaneous. When we think about disruption before, Florida's been a place for disruption. Think about air conditioning, think about theme parks, think about the railroad, think about automobiles. All of those things transformed this state, but they happened within many years for us to prepare for that. But now it's 3.1 years across multiple industries at the same time. We look at the rate of innovation. Obviously, adoption of innovation happens much quicker now. So how do you plan for something like that when innovation is happening simultaneously across multiple industry sectors that impact how people move, how people visit, and also demographics? So when we think of innovation, it becomes an increasingly greater challenge, especially since it's happening so much faster and there's very little time to plan. I live in Miami, so Uber parachuted in Miami, and the planning agencies had to deal with it, even though they were not yet regulated. So how do you adapt plans in an urban environment to something as disruptive as Uber? I have this ad here from Radio Shack. There's very few Radio Shacks left, so that in and of itself was a transformation. But this is from 1991, and the reason why I bring it up is completely dating myself. That was the year I graduated high school, 1991. So we think of 2030. These are the kids who will be graduating high school in 2030. All of these things that are in this ad can be done with your cell phone. So think about kids that are graduating today and that will be graduating in 2030, how much faster their lives will change, what that will mean. The nature of work, what people do for a living, the changes that are happening across various industry sectors. Yes, today Uber's a big employer. They're not gonna be. That's gonna have a big impact on the people that are currently employed. Think of the nature of work. These are the types of industry sectors that will likely be most impacted when we look at innovation and disruption. From accommodation, food services, transportation and warehousing. Think about what's happening in the logistics space, how much robots are replacing what's happening in a warehousing environment. We just had a speaker talk about autonomous vehicles. Think about those drivers being replaced by just autonomous vehicles themselves. Manufacturing, there's a lot of 3D printing that's happening, increasingly more so here in the state of Florida. We think about the space environment. Huge opportunities for 3D manufacturing. Those are workers that will no longer be employed. Health and medical services, and of course education. Think about how kids are learning today and how they will be learning going forward. Florida already has an online university. Imagine 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 10 years from now, how kids will be learning, what that means to education. And we think about resources. So federal debt held by the public as a percentage of GDP is increasingly rising. And when we think about transportation funding, while Florida has benefited from not being so heavily dependent on federal transportation dollars, those dollars still matter. And they're tied to the gas tax, and well, we're moving into a world where it's electric vehicles. And what does that mean to the gas tax, and what does that mean for transportation funding? So if you recall the scorecard that I showed earlier, Florida receives every hour $989,000 every hour into the state of Florida, and that's on the scorecard. That's from private sector wealth, people that are moving to this state. 1,000 people come every day. How do we take that wealth and reinvest it in things like transportation? After all, they're using it. They're coming into the state. We have 5 million new people coming in by 2030. Imagine all that private wealth that's coming in. Can we repurpose it? Port Manatee was talking about public-private partnerships. How do we look at alternative funding? And as a state, you all as planners know that FDOT has been on the leading edge of public-private partnerships. But how do we transform that? How do we move that much faster? How do we look at private sector dollars to invest in the transportation modes that we're going to need going forward? This is from Ken Armstrong, who heads up the Florida Trucking Association. Some of you may know him. But he talks about how things are changing or will be changed, the terminology that we'll be using going forward. Freight, shopping, delivery into driverless trucks, delivery drones, universal shopping, all those will be universal realities. But that's happening so much faster now than we can imagine. It's no longer the future, it is today. When we think about the regulatory environment, the feds are reacting. Now you have Autonomous Vehicles 3.0 that was released not that long ago. Secretary of Transportation Chow was talking about a proposal for drones. And the Department of Transportation in October said that they will no longer assume that commercial drivers are human. And that accelerated a lot of changes in the private sector. All of a sudden, trucking companies that were looking at platooning now said we're going to skip to stage 4, almost a fully autonomous. Why bother with platooning if if the U.S. Department of Transportation said you no longer have to assume a truck driver is human? So all of a sudden, the rate of disruption and how that accelerates private sector innovation really took off. And we look at e-commerce and what that means, the challenges of delivery, how things are being delivered today, whether it is from human drivers that are delivering e-commerce to autonomous vehicles that will be delivering e-commerce. Again, in Miami, that's already being tested. We have Ford that's doing deliveries all over the city. And they've partnered with Domino's. They're looking at partnering with Walmart, and I've had the chance to ride one of the Ford vehicles. So it's happening in already significant environments. So this is not the future. This is today. And planning for that is certainly very disruptive. But even what the final mile looks like, these are conceptual drawings from companies that are looking at using sidewalks for final mile delivery. So it's no longer how do you use the roads, how do you redesign roadways that currently exist, but now sidewalks are being considered as options for that final mile, from getting that product all the way straight to the hands of an actual consumer. So they're testing they're looking at different concepts. Some of them are already being tested, but obviously the robot dogs are not. But that's a conceptual rendering of what private sector companies are looking at. And trade. Port Manatee was here. This is a center for trade. Obviously, we move a lot of freight in and out of the state. We also consume a lot, and we bring in a lot of product, but we also manufacture a lot of product that's later exported. So we measure who we trade with, and who we trade with matters because that impacts the products that get into the highways and the roadways and how we move it. So this was from 2014, and we look at the countries that we formerly traded with, and these will change and have changed over time. And we look at today. Now, what you don't see in 2014 is, do you see Mexico? Look where Canada is. Look at Venezuela in the bottom, and look how that's changed. Mexico is now a top 5 trading partner. Port Manatee showed Mexico and talked about Mexican trade. That's something that happened in the state of Florida. We diversified who we trade with and how we trade, but they're also importing products. We're importing significant quantities of products from Mexico. We're also exporting significant products from Mexico. So as you see in exports, the asterisk is there. That's origin exports, meaning stuff we produce in the state that gets exported. And we're moving that in and out of, for the most part, our ports. From 2014 to today, 5 Florida ports have now direct shipping service to Mexico. That did not exist before. That trade then gets in our highways, gets trucked. It's different trade that did not exist in 2014 that exists today. And we look at other trading partners. Germany is also there too. We're exporting a lot of manufactured goods to Germany that are in our highways. A lot of it's going by ship. What kind of infrastructure our ports are going to need? And conversely, our airports. Some of the stuff on the e-commerce side is retail goods, consumer goods that need to move by air cargo. Do our airports have the infrastructure they need for sustained international growth? We look at global markets changing. The bigger circle is 2030, and the smaller circle is 2016. We look at markets that are expanding around the world, and we look at how trade is shifting. Now, we recently had something that we couldn't predict, such as the tariffs that were imposed on China. And some companies are already responding by shifting trade production centers away from China into India and Southeast Asia. What does that mean for shipping lanes? Reduce usage of the Panama Canal and increase usage of the Suez Canal. Suez Canal, fastest access is eastern seaboard ports. We have 15 ports in the state of Florida. All of a sudden, we shifted the dynamics of trade. Manufacturing and production centers moved to places where a Suez Canal was a more viable option, and we have the opportunity to capture more trade. Can we handle more trade? Already, 88% of what we move here moves by truck. So much moves in our highways. Never mind the 118 million visitors, never mind the 20 million people that are here. Think about how much freight we would be moving as this opportunity presents itself. And then we think about regulatory landscapes, forming partnerships. Connectivity is not just connectivity from internet to the vehicle. It's also connectivity to your region, connectivity to your partners, to stakeholders that will help us advance this. Connectivity to the private sector, understanding how they are moving forward, how quickly they are transforming. 3 years is now. Who knows how much faster they'll be bringing in innovations and disrupting industry. Needs are changing. So we look at trucking options, we look at freight movements, we look at staging areas for e-commerce. How do we use the land that we have for different purposes? And autonomous parking is another one. It's available land that exists right now. How do we use it for economic development opportunities going forward? Freight hubs. 2 of the 9 counties that will have the largest growth are located here. You're gonna need a lot of freight. You're gonna be moving a lot more freight than what you're already moving. You have Seaport, you have several airports. What will they look like? Consumers that are here, how are they going to want their goods? How does that move? You also produce a lot of agriculture, you do mining, and there's manufacturing here. Those freight generators will have different demands. How are they going to be moving product in and out of their facilities? Transportation, we look at mobility solutions, regional movements, how are we connecting to the larger marketplace? Telecommunications, all that connectivity is going to require people to connect with each other. How do we plan for better connectivity through telecom? And of course, ports and airports. I mentioned that earlier about how trade is changing, how trade lanes shift on a regular basis, and how you have to accommodate for additional trade shifts going forward. So how do we respond? From collaborating to innovating to investing and to partnering. words that currently are used today, but those meetings, those definitions change over time as innovation happens, as private sector transforms much more of what we do. And so collaborations become much more important. You know, it's great to see so many people in the room, but not just that you all stayed. And this is part of what collaboration looks like, is learning, listening, hearing, and understanding what's happening in the world outside so we can try to make an attempt to plan a little bit better for the future. This is where the scorecard information is, as well as the 2030 plan. So if you all want to download it, feel free to go there and download. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
You are challenged to go home and get involved in your long-range transportation planning process. You have 18 months to engage. The plans are due at the end of 2020, but this is a public process, and every one of you now are the smartest people in the room when you go home. So go back, use this information to engage with your local MPO and TPO. Now we're going to move to paper. On your placemat, you have an exit poll. If you wouldn't mind answering those questions and leaving your placemat here, we would appreciate it. If you really want to take it with you, borrow someone else's. Please tell us what county you're from, even if you don't want to give us your name and email address. We will compile this information and share it with the MPOs across the region, also doing it by county. And if you provide an email, we will share the answers with you. We are well over our time. We appreciate you staying with us, but everybody had something important to say, and we couldn't think of anything to cut out of the program. So we appreciate you being here. Our speakers will be here for a minute if you have a particular question for them, but we will not hold you all in these seats since you've already stayed beyond the time we ask you to be here. Thank you so much for coming. Please give all of our speakers a big round of applause. We'll look forward to seeing you at your MPO meeting.